Good morning, dear ladies, gentlemen. Welcome to our first panel session on navigating business models for climate investments. Our objective in this plenary is to explore how we can rapidly scale up innovative business models that incorporate risk management in ventures and projects to address our climate change and sustainability challenges, but also to make good business. We have a very exciting session here. We'll first of all have a presentation on a case study that I think is really exemplary and really shows how we can really challenge business as usual and move forward into the new paradigm. And then an exciting panel that bring real depth of experience in addressing these challenges in their respective fields and working together. And from their experiences, share insights on replicating successful business models. But first, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Samir Ibrahim, the founder and CEO of SunCulture, and ask him to talk us through a case study of how his business has really gone through a transformation and brought innovation and impact in this space. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to welcome Mr. Samir Ibrahim.
Is there a clicker that I can use? No clicker? Next works. And is it possible to use a wireless mic? If not, I can just use this. Hello? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Thank you so much. Nice to meet everybody. We're going to start with a little game with prizes. If you win any of the game, you get these very cool SunCulture hats that even our investors don't. I know you're saying you don't have one yet. We have them for you too. I have a presentation. Can someone put that up on the screen? Thank you. So I'm going to show you a series of graphs and pictures. I've removed the titles and the legend. And if anyone guesses right what they are, they'll get a very special prize. I know it's a bit hard to see. That's a map of the world. And it's, thank you. Can anyone guess what this is showing? What is it? Global temperatures. You're getting warm. No pun intended. Impact. There's a mic right behind you. Heat map. Heat map. Getting warmer. Excuse me? Almost. Rain-fed agriculture. It's the effects of climate change on many staple crops. So very close. Everyone is getting warm. The green are areas where there's going to be an increase in production by 5%. Everything else is going to be a loss of either 0 to 5% or greater than 5%. You can see that climate change is impacting most of our staple crops in a negative way outside of Europe. So if you look at everywhere south of Europe, mostly in the global south around the equator, climate change is making it very hard to grow food. This is a very hard one. Any guesses? Clearly this is going to be on theme. Any wild guesses? This one's very hard. So the one on the left shows the x-axis on both graphs is temperature change, so an increase in temperature in Celsius. The graph on the left shows the change in global output for processed food, livestock, and crops, and the right graph shows an increase in global prices. So you can see that as production goes down, prices for food goes up. Supply demand, very simple, but very powerful slide. You can see that there's a bigger change in crops, both in terms of a drop in production and an increase in price when it comes to climate change. So the hotter it gets over pre-industrial times, crops are getting hit the most and prices are going much higher. This is my favorite one. It's the saddest one, I think. But any guess what this is? The bottom shows years from somewhere maybe 50 years ago up until 2017. And then that's the most important part to know. Any guesses what this could be? Not yield per what? Not yield for rain-fed. That's a good guess. I think everyone's afraid to guess because these are really hard. How about if you guess, you're going to get a really cool prize. Yes, you can have one, Tamer. Any ticket? Yes, in the back.
The effect of global warming on farm production.
No, but that's interesting, and the graph looks similar. It's actually how price increases for food create conflict. The green lines show the FAO price index. So when food prices spike from 2007 to 2008, there were violent riots in 40 cities. So the relationship between food prices and political instability is quite high. Something that people don't talk about often. A few months ago, actually when Russia invaded Ukraine a year and a half ago, that summer The Economist printed one cover where it talked about global food prices and riots. That's it. It's been very, very quiet in the news, but increase in food prices create riots. Anybody know where this picture is from? Nairobi, exactly. One winner over there. Let's give her a round of applause. So this was a few weeks ago. We had planned riots, planned demonstrations because the cost of living has gone up. So one last guess of graphs. It goes from 2015 to 2095 on the x-axis, and there's 7 different colors of lines. This is population demand, population increase. The purple line in the middle is Africa. The top line is Asia. The rest of the regions are in the bottom line. So what's this story telling us? It's telling us that climate change is a very big threat to food output. It's saying that as food output decreases, prices increase. When prices increase, bad things happen. Political instability, mass migration, people growing less food, which puts us in that same virtuous cycle. But we need to grow more food in order to feed a growing population. That's the story. Now, the answer would seem simple, right? Just do what we're doing more. Throw a bunch of money at the problem, grow more food, easy problem to solve. But agriculture contributes to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So the story changes a little bit. We need to figure out how to improve food production, but doing it in a way that we haven't done before, but it's going to put us in that same virtuous cycle where climate change is reducing yields, yields are increasing prices, prices are reducing people growing food, increasing political instability, etc., etc. So the question we're asking ourselves today is, how do we improve and protect the productivity of food? Because that helps relieve the stress that climate puts on not only our food systems, but our economic and our political systems. Now, for the next maybe 15 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through a framework that we use to answer this question. This framework is a framework that can be used for other types of problems, but it's one that we use to help put a lens on the business that we built. The best way for us to think about solving this problem is really simple. Take existing, non-sexy, low-tech solutions that work in other parts of the world, make them high-tech, so decarbonize them, and then deploy them in areas that have a lot of resources. The way we've approached solving this intersection of food and climate and political stability and economic stability is by taking irrigation. It's worked in lots of places around the world. It increased their yields by up to 5 times. Very non-sexy. We decarbonize it, so we make it solar. Because if you replace every water pump for irrigation in the world with solar, you'll decrease global greenhouse gas emissions by 7%. Fun fact, as big as the cement industry. And then we deploy it in an area that has abundant resources. Africa. We have 60% of the world's unused farmable land. 2/3 of the population work in farming. You have enough groundwater to increase irrigation by 20 times. We have abundant solar resources. So we take an existing low-tech solution, make it high-tech, and then deploy it in an area that's abundant in natural resources. Now, the next question obviously is, so why hasn't this happened yet? This makes a lot of sense. The reason is because people don't have a lot of money here. In Kenya, for example, 85% of smallholder farmers make less on an annual basis than all of our flights cost to get to this conference. It's the same reason why people haven't irrigated in Africa before. Of the 700 million people living in smallholder farming households in sub-Saharan Africa, only 4% irrigate. That's compared to 37% in Asia. Irrigation is really simple, but it's too expensive. And because of that, people haven't built the delivery platform to get irrigation or other types of climate technology into the hands of smallholder farmers. No one has invested in resources to build the capabilities to do R&D, to do sales and marketing, to do installation, delivery, training, after-sales support, or sell value-added services. No one's built the rails to push any climate tech to people, which is why it's not out there. So over the last 11 years, we built it. All of it. We use financial services and carbon revenues to make the cost of solar irrigation 50% cheaper than diesel and petrol pumps. And then we use an embedded data science platform to help farmers make better decisions and then sell things through an agriculture marketplace. There are 4 building blocks to our business. The first is our tech. We've designed what's been voted as the best solar irrigation systems in the world. It's a panel the size of me on the roof of a rural off-grid on the roof of an off-grid smallholder farming household. It plugs into some electronics. The electronics plug into a water pump that's in any water source, lake, river, borehole, well, water harvester. We bring water from the ground to the surface with pipes, and then we use sprinklers and drip irrigation to disperse that across the farm. We sell these systems with a network of field sales agents, telesales agents on the phone in retail locations, and then we do installation, training, and ongoing maintenance with a network of engineers. And that's in the countries we operate in, so Kenya, Uganda, Ivory Coast. And then in places where we have distributors like Ethiopia, Togo, and Zambia, we use partners to do this. The second building block of the business is financing. Most people can't afford the upfront cost of solar irrigation, even if it's somewhere between $500 and $800. They're only making $1,000 a year. It's too expensive. So we allow farmers to pay us a deposit and then pay us in monthly installments of between 24 and 30 months. The beauty of this is that the amount that they pay us on an annual basis is less than both the additional income that they're making by using our systems and less than the money that they would be paying for fuel. We've also designed the system to be able to shut off if necessary, so it improves payments. I think the fact that farmers are making more money is a big reason why our collection rates have been stable over the past few years, or in other sectors, collections have gone down. Third building block is software. We use software to run the business, help farmers make better decisions, and then, of course, sell things through our marketplace. We've designed a plug-and-play back-end system that allows us to expand into new markets in an asset-light way. We've built a customer portal and a mobile app because 86% of our farmers have a smartphone. It's a way for customers to engage with us, take advice from us, give us recommendations. We're able to do things like correlate asset utilization with repayments. So we're now experimenting with gamifying good farming behavior. And then when you have a network of farmers who are growing more food, making more money, engaging with you digitally, taking advice, they want to do the same things that we do when we make more money and buy more stuff. So now we've built a marketplace where people can buy more things from us. We've started with soil tests. Next year we'll do insurance, inputs, other products and services. The last building block to the business is the most interesting for me right now is carbon. You know, in most parts of the world, agriculture and energy is subsidized. In the EU, every single farmer every year gets $4,200 in a cash subsidy. This doesn't include any input subsidies. This doesn't include any financing subsidies. Cash given to them in their hands. We have none of that in sub-Saharan Africa. So we decided that we're going to launch our carbon business. We sell carbon credits generated by displacing diesel and petrol pumps in both the voluntary and the compliance markets. We use those carbon revenues to bring the price of our systems down, so we self-subsidize while retaining our margin. We were Africa's first registered solar irrigation carbon project in December. We just went through our first audit. We're getting our first issuance by the end of this year. But we've already started selling carbon. At the beginning of the year, we ran a pilot to see what would happen when we reduced our price. We worked with a third-party consultant named Cross Boundary, and their research said that if we can reduce our price by 4 to 5 times, our sales would increase, or our addressable market would increase if we were able to reduce our price by 50%, our sales would increase by 4 to 5 times by nature of our addressable market increasing by 4 to 5 times. At the beginning of the year, with support from ARAF and others in the room, we ran a pilot where we reduced our price by 28%. Our sales velocity increased by 4.3 times. And if you put all these building blocks together, this is what it looks like. This is actually our picture. This is actually Tamer's picture. We took from a farmer that we visited last year. The left is a farmer growing maize using rain-fed irrigation, and the right is a farmer using SunCulture solar irrigation. Surprising, because most people thought irrigating maize would not be useful. We've seen maize yields increase by 2 times. Over 90% of our farmers have increased their land under irrigation, increased their production, increased their quality of life, increased their incomes. The impact is massive. This is why we've become the largest distributor of solar irrigation systems in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of the systems have been sold in the last 4 years. We have 42,000 customers, and we have over 50% of the market. Now, if I were sitting where you are, I'd say, so what? 42,000 farmers is nothing. We're not going to solve the problem with this. And you're right. This is a very, very small amount of farmers that we've served. And I get this question asked all the time, right? Okay, you've built the platform. You've proved that you can have some sort of scale. How do you actually solve the problem? Now, solving the problem is complex. Food systems are very complex. There's no silver bullet. You can't just go and deploy a bunch of irrigation and solve the problem. But starting with food production, which is the genesis of food security, is a pretty good place to start. We know, because of Dahlberg and Mercy Corps' research, that in order for us to reach food security in Kenya, we would need to deploy 274,000 solar irrigation systems. And while 42,000 systems isn't enough to solve the problem, $219 million is. That's how much it would cost all in to deploy 274,000 solar irrigation systems in Kenya. That's 40% less than what one government aid agency spent on food relief in Kenya last year alone. Now, there's a lot of assumptions to make on this, but the impact is massive. 274,000 irrigation systems would create over 1 million lives that would be impacted. You'd create over 400,000 jobs. You'd grow over 7 million metric tons of food. And in terms of increased incomes for farmers, you're looking at over $5 billion US. Now, again, there's assumptions to take, right? We have to take assumptions in terms of carbon costs, cost of capital, cost of goods sold, the relationship between reduction in price and increase in sales. We've had to take assumptions on, are we going to be looking at increasing in calories or nutrition diversity? Where are we going to sell these systems? What's happening in the water tables? We have to answer questions such as, what about other inputs? What about affordability of food? And we have all of those assumptions written out very clearly, and I'll show you how to access that later. But if you take very conservative assumptions and you put a business plan together, you would need only $61 million of equity, a little over $90 million of debt, a little over $46.5 million of carbon, and $19.5 million in results-based financing or subsidy. My pitch today is to get this done. $219 million isn't that much money relative to what we have in the room. My idea would be to put together a country program led by some of the beautifully accredited GCF funds in the room and put together a Kenya Food Security Fund that has 4 types of capital with the numbers listed on the board. We can handle the carbon bit, by the way, and use this as a case study to then put food security funds together for 5 to 6 countries over 5 to 6 years. The beauty about this is if we were going to fund this for 5 years, we would ask to have 2 years fully funded with an agreement that if we were to reach milestones, you release the other 3 years of funding. 2 years of funding is only 19% of this. It's a little over $30 million. So my ask today is, why not get this done? We know the tech works. We know the system works. We know the impact is there. We've worked with everyone to make sure natural resources can be managed. We've proven we can allocate funds effectively. And now let's actually solve the problem. If you want to look at all of our assumptions, there's a QR code here. We'll ask the organizers to send this around. If any of you want to take a scan of the QR code now, feel free. Otherwise, this will be sent around later. In the QR code, it goes through all of the assumptions that we've taken to make this. And I'm looking forward to hopefully putting together a Kenya food security project very soon, maybe even today. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Samir. A very innovative, exciting presentation. So I'd now like to invite the other panelists to come up to the stage. Would you like to come up? I'm also missing a couple of my panelists. Is Diana in the room? Here you are. Thank you. So please take a seat. Fantastic. So let me introduce our panelists briefly, and then we'll jump into the conversations. So first of all, we have Elia Timotheo, who is the CEO of EA Foods. And then we have Abdul Majid Musa, who's come back to the stage again. Thank you. Vincent Chin, who is the Global Vice Chair of the Public Sector Practice at Boston Consulting Group. Then we have Diana Chepengo, who is the Africa and Middle East Asia Coordinator at the Vulnerable 20 Group of Ministers of Finance, and also the Sustainable Insurance Facility at UNEP FI. And then Mr. Tamer, who is the Managing Director of Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. Thank you. And Samir's come back to the stage as well. Thank you. So what we'd like to do is just explore a little bit on how each of you have been involved in this space in bringing innovative business models to the play. And especially to understand what sort of tools you've been using to navigate the key risks, opportunities that we see in climate change. And I'd like to start, first of all, with Mr. Tamar. So could you maybe just briefly introduce your own journey in the climate space and how you've helped shape Acumen Resilient Agriculture's fund's position in the climate financing space? And also, as an impact funds manager, what's your approach to identifying and investing in climate finance projects? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So, of course, first of all, speaking after Samir, I will sound too lame, so please, yeah. So, Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, from the name you can tell, first of all, we are part of the Acumen family. We are sponsored by Acumen. We are anchored by the Green Climate Fund. So, the fund owes its presence to the support of the Green Climate Fund, providing us with the first loss layer that help us go out and raise senior equity. So, once again, thanks to GCF. Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, ARAF, started or was built on the learnings that Acumen had accumulated over the years in different emerging markets. And the idea was those smallholder farmers are the most affected by climate change. Climate change is a fact of life. How can we help those farmers adapt and become more resilient to climate change? So that was the initial idea of ARAF. And ARAF, we always say as an investment team, we were two lenses, the impact lens and the commercial lens. So when we look at an investment opportunity, the first thing we look at is, does that business model tick the box for climate resilience? And we use a tool that Jacqueline talked about earlier that was developed in collaboration between Acumen and Winrock with the support of the Green Climate Fund to actually assess the climate resilience of that business model. Once we tick that box, then we start looking at the commercial viability and scalability of that business model. Okay. And then the following step, we always say that we like to look at platform businesses, businesses that address more than one pain point of those farmers. Pain points such as having access to finance, things that Samir already talked about, access to finance, access to inputs, access to agronomy support, and access to markets. So we like to invest in businesses that address more than one pain point. And we do that, and we start doing that actually back in 2020 when we start deploying our fund. And so far we have invested in 12 companies with operations in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast.
Thank you. Can I just maybe ask, what sort of risks do you see in businesses that are not showing climate resilience in their propositions? And also, what are some of the paradigm shifting ventures that you've been involved in that really, you think, really demonstrate how that climate resilience really makes a difference?
Sure. The greatest risk is for those agri-businesses is for farmers to stop farming. That's one of the greatest risks because of climate change and everything we've talked about so far. So that's one of the greatest risks. So we always like to look for business models where the sustainability of the farmer is a building block for the sustainability of the business itself. And we've seen, like, when we think about innovation on our portfolio, each company has its own innovation in its own way. Of course, Samir talked about SunCulture. Elia will talk about East Africa foods. But one of the business models that we always talked about, and people, when they first hear that we invested in a chicken business, in a backyard chicken business, the first question we get, like, chicken and climate change? Like, what is the correlation between chicken and climate adaptation or climate resilience? Well, this company was so innovative, and Jacqueline talked about them earlier. Now, they are in almost 8 countries across Africa. They sell annually 50 million day-old chicks. The farmers who use those chicks produce this year 5 billion eggs. But now think about it this way. Those farmers, if they only grow crops, their income is seasonal. Now they have this special breed called dual-purpose poultry, where the chicken would lay eggs through the year, 200 eggs to be, give or take. And then at the end of the year, that chicken builds meat, so they sell it for the meat. So now their income becomes more of, let's call it weekly income instead of seasonal income. Their income increases, and as a result of diversifying their income source, their income volatility decreases. Increasing income, combining that with reducing income volatility, allows those farmers to have savings. Bingo. Now, if there is a climate shock, they can actually absorb that climate shock. And combined with the sustainable practices, now they become more like they can adapt to climate change, among other things, of course.
Thank you very much, Tamar. Great points there. Maybe now, if we can ask Mr. Vincent Chin, can you just give a brief introduction to how you've been working in Boston Consulting Group in helping your clients navigate the changing climate landscape? And also maybe give a management consultant's perspective of what you see as the role of climate ventures in the emerging business ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you. I consult governments around the world, and so my perspective is less private sector, but more public sector. So I'm not going to talk about business models, but something more macro, which is the levers that government has to enact business models in the economy. But let me start off with, I guess it's a forum, so it's always good to have thought-provoking perspectives. And let me start off with a thought-provoking perspective. And the perspective I want to first share in a very nice and painful soundbite is I think the era of globalization is over. Okay, let that sink in for a little bit. And what I mean by that is that for those of you who are students of economics and you learn about Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, that every country of every economy, every market should produce what you are most efficiently able to do, and then let other people produce other things, guns versus butter, whatever. The cost of shipping parts of your supply chain from one side of the world to be assembled in another side of the world, to be then finished in the third part of the world, and then back to the consumers in the first part of the world. The economics of that may work because logistics costs have come down, but the carbon cost of that no longer work. What does that mean to policymakers in charge of economic development in countries? You almost need to enact the global economy within your own country. Meaning, you need to have a food industry, you need to have a manufacturing industry, you need to have service industries, all within your own country. I see this as an unparalleled opportunity for developing economies to take hold of their economic futures. Because in the past, you were just a factory to the world or the farm to the world. Now, you could be the whole economy of the world to yourself. Now, how does government then enact those possibilities in the country? It really is about incentivizing and regulating industry to do more in this space. And when I talk to government leaders, I usually share with them 4 aspects that they can do this. One is to help companies create inclusive supply chains within the country they are in. So not just one part of the supply chain, but to have a total supply chain within the country. Number 2, to have inclusive and sustainable organizations. I think too much of work does not work anymore because the way it is conducted, it is to the purpose of the company rather than the purpose of the people. So if you rethink that, you could unlock significant productivity. Third, it's to do inclusive products, sustainable products, and finally, services. If the government regulates all these 4 and incentivize the creation for companies who become inclusive through their supply chain, through their organizations, through their products and services, and the capital providers will reward companies who do that, I think there is a chance for these companies to really thrive and the economy in each of these markets will really take off. And we have some, given that this forum is funded by GCF and there are a lot of funders here, I also wanted to say that for funders to also recognize that this world is really dynamic, is being shaped now. And we talked about DFI earlier. I think DFI sometimes have too stringent a criteria on how they assess projects. The projects are being created, the basis of innovation, the basis of competitive advantage are changing day by day, and they need to have a much more dynamic criteria as well to be able to understand and fund these projects. And with that, business models happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Globalization is over. You heard it here. I think that's some really great points. One big challenge, though, is we're mostly private sector people in the room. How do we get that narrative over to governments to understand that paradigm shift in their institutional management to be able to create an enabling framework? What's your best practice experiences?
I can't speak for governments, but I can give you examples, and I think some of these are public, so I can talk about it. We are here in Africa, but some of the examples I'm going to bring about are examples from Asia. I work closely with the government of Vietnam. Vietnam is not a high-income country, as you know. It's a low, middle-income country. Vietnam has made some pledges to net zero and transition, but the most important focus of the Vietnam government now is green growth industries. That's what they're going after. They knew where to start, because if you invest in green growth, transition happens. And when transition happens, net zero happens. So what they're doing, the Vietnamese government, they've identified a few key sectors where they want green growth to happen, and they are directly enabling and funding those industries. Enabling from an environmental perspective, so they create the factors of production that will make it happen, and then they incentivize the companies directly. I think there is an EV manufacturer in Vietnam now whose market cap is as big as Tesla already. It's amazing.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And now maybe I would just turn to Diana. Diana, I understand before joining UNEP and the V20 team there, you were previously in the insurance space. So maybe I could just ask you just to talk a little bit through your career before you came into UNEP. And I've certainly seen that the role of insurance in business is most notable when it's no longer available, because then other financing stops. And we see that with the Paris Accord, with international insurers retreating from insuring coal-related business. We've also seen that with the export of grain from Ukraine, but when the insurers were unwilling to insure the shipping, the export of grain stopped. So maybe could I just ask you just to talk through a little bit of your career, your experience into your journey in UNEP V20, and what you see as the role of insurance in the climate business, especially from that transition from risk protection to an enabler.
So yeah, yes, my background is in insurance, so I understand what they do, and we all understand what insurance does in terms of risk protection. And now there has been a slight shift from just risk protection. Not that they're shifting away from risk protection, but putting more emphasis on being an enabler. I think the reason that has been happening is because we've seen their books being hit so hard with the effects of climate change. The frequency is high, the severity is high, and that has a net impact on their books. So of course, for a long-term benefit, it is key that insurers have to be enablers as they continue being risk protectors. Now, one of the ways that they're being enablers is one on risk mitigation. And when we talk about risk mitigation, we look at the kind of products that they are pushing out there, and how do they incentivize people to actually take up coverage for risk, while at the same time they're having risk mitigation measures in place. And allow me to give a practical example of an insurer being an enabler. So what has been happening is where you craft an insurance solutions targeting a particular sector, for example, while in the process, then you deliver a bundled approach on how we can, for example, lower carbon emissions. Let me take an example of the logistics sector. A lot has been done in agriculture space, but let's look at the logistics sector. It's one of the contributors to carbon emissions. But the same logistics sector have micro players in that space. How do we access those micro players? By crafting solutions for them, because also they happen to be the least insured. So in the process, as a business case scenario for insurance companies is craft solutions for these people. And one of the solutions could be health insurance. And we cannot underestimate how climate change has affected health. We have floods which bring about vector-borne diseases. We have the changes in temperatures which bring about other ailments for these people. But most of these people as well don't have insurances. So when they're crafting the solutions, the insurance companies are targeting to provide insurance solutions for these people in the logistics space, but at the same time, by introducing an element of, for example, use of EV vehicles for you to access insurance. So for the logistics space, for example, in Kenya, we see people using a lot of motorbikes. How do we help them to access insurance at the same time push them to actually shift from using fossil fuel motorbikes to EV motorbikes? So by bundling that solution together, they create an enabling environment to transition into a more climate smart environment. So that is one way in terms of mitigation. Two, data and analytics. I think we can underestimate the power of that, and insurance companies use a lot of that data to actually do the pricing of their risks. Now, that same data can be used by other entities like governments, investors, and businesses to just look at what are the opportunities being presented, what are the risks that we are seeing by the analytics and the predictive analytics being done by insurance companies, and how can we make use of that information then to have a greener economy and a better transition to a low carbon economy. Third item is on investments. Insurers are large investors and hold several funds, especially the pension funds, which sit with many insurance companies. How then can they utilize those funds for a greener economy? And we've seen them, and what we want to see more happening is them investing in more green investments and sustainable infrastructure to just push support on the green economy and to ensure that we're all building a better environment for the future.
Thank you. That's some really innovative business models. Just a follow-up question on that. If you could briefly just explain, there's a lot of need for educating people of a change in mindset. How in these spaces have you been doing the reach outs to educate, whether it's the governments or the financial regulators or the end users, on that change in mindset?
So, yeah, so as I said, we have to take a long-term view on this, and the more reason is because if fine, the risks are here with us right now. We are dealing with them. We are providing solutions as insurance industries, but we all have to shift how we look at things. So the insurance companies, for example, now are looking at how do we provide solutions which right now will feed into a longer term effect. And there are many players that we can, many ways in which we can collaborate. This one is collaboration with governments, collaboration with the private sector, collaboration with regulators as well in terms of pushing for policies that will support adoption of ESG on various, by various society members and players and the various stakeholders along the value chain. So by looking at this, we bring on board a way in which insurers are making an impactful change in terms of the changes in policy and in a longer term view of how things should be done.
Just ask one more follow-up on that. How can the likes of the international financing institutes help in strengthening that kind of narrative and education to governments and regulators?
So how does finance? I think one of the key things is bringing on board the right financing structures. Let me use the same example I used on the logistics space. One of the impediments we are seeing in actualizing adoption of EV in the logistics space is lack of, for example, charging infrastructure. So when there is lack of charging infrastructure, that means adoption of EV by the various players, including the borders or the EV vehicles used for cab hiring, for example, then it means the project is not able to take off successfully. So to do that, we need support in terms of government collaborating with the finance sector to ensure that we have charging infrastructures across the country. And this is something which is easily scalable to other countries as well, because like looking at the African continent, for example, that's a key mode of deliveries. So how can the government then work jointly with the finance sector to provide, one, access to charging points for the e-vehicles, and two, remember the cost of also acquiring these assets do not come cheaply. And however much some of the players have tried to create long-term repayment options, but there's always the 10%, 20% deposit that you have to put in. How then can the finance strategy come in to find a solution on providing this 10% to the individuals or to the lives or the institutions or SMEs that are trying to get into this space and want to acquire these assets? So there's a lot that has to be still done in terms of financing and providing support to access some of these green and low carbon emission projects and assets.
Thank you very much, Diana. Really, really helpful. Maybe I'll just turn to Elia now and just ask, could you just briefly introduce your business at EA Foods? And EA Foods has gone through quite an exciting journey in its growth, and also has been helping, again, with your clients, changing the climate landscape. Can you just talk through a little bit of that? And especially as a young entrepreneur, what have been the big barriers that you've encountered? How have you dealt with these barriers? Who's helped you along the way? If you just talk us through a little bit of that journey. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Elia, CEO East Africa Foods. It used to be called East Africa Fruits. About 11 years ago, I worked on a research on how the government could help farmers improve their farming experience. And some of the comments and challenges that farmers faced in Tanzania were lack of market. And one particular striking challenge was they lose about 50% of everything that they farm. And at that point, it was a striking moment for me to create a company that could sell that and bring more money, income to farmers. So I created a company, East Africa Foods, that uses technology to modernize farm to market supply chain. And we do that by aggregating produce from smallholder farmers across the country. And when I say across the country, if you look at Tanzania, for those who have never been there, it takes about 1,000 kilometers to source food from farm to the market. And it's a long distance we're talking about. And so some of the solutions during aggregation and storage, we use solar-powered storage facilities that can extend shelf life of produce. For instance, potatoes, we're able now to store them for more than 30 days, something that could never been done before. And through that, we have been able to build one of the largest and leading produce distribution company that is sourcing and distributing over 500 tons of produce on a daily basis. And you have impacted over 10,000 farmers along the way. And we believe that more could be done to more millions of farmers in Tanzania, given that over 60% of the economy is dependent directly or indirectly in agriculture. And that is our call today. Now, connecting that to my experience growing this company, it has been a lot of there have been a lot of challenges. I'll talk about two primarily. One is about building the right team that can foster the vision of the founder and of the company and put it in reality. It has been a very big challenge for us to really assemble the right team that has taken us where we are today. The second one, which is actually the biggest challenge, is funding. And underfunding, 2 points there. The right kind of funding. It's hard for a startup to get funding, especially a startup that has no support from probably friends, family, those initial steps. The local infrastructure is not supportive enough for the startups to really grow and become the largest companies. I'm sorry, Mr. Abdul Majid, but the banks for startups are not very friendly. If you go to a bank, if you don't have a house from your father, uncle, or mother, you won't get the loan, right? And which, of course, I will call as a challenge to the banks that uh, to invest some of the profits in investing in some of those startups that cannot afford to have securities. That is one of the cause. But on the other hand, even those enablers, investors who have been there to support our growth, sometimes it takes too long. It could take 24 months, it could take 30 months to get to land an investment. But what matters is the willingness. There are investors, ERAF, one of them, who have been there holding us through the journey, supporting us. And those have been the ones that we have been working with and took us where we are today. Thank you.
So just talk us a little more into how, when you first put that first business case together, who gave you help in doing that? And what was the key success factors in making that business case something that then what happens next? Who was your anchor investor? Give some tips to the entrepreneurs in the audience here.
Well, I was fortunate to start a small business when I was doing my undergrad, and this is about 12 years ago when I was doing my undergrad. And one of the opportunities that I saw was lack of computers. While in many developed world, laptops and computers were some things easy gadgets to make. For us at that point were not easy. So my first business was to purchase used laptops and sell to the universities in Tanzania. It was one of the universities in Morogoro, southern part of Tanzania. And by then, I was able to build the largest computer distribution company in that particular area. But I was fortunate as well to get support from family, my father and my mother. But I'm sure there are many other entrepreneurs who never have such opportunity. But further to that, I was fortunate again applying because I made a lot of applications to get funding, and I got to be introduced to one of the angel investors from the US. And I think from that point is through connections is when we were able to raise small bit of funding, $25,000 to $50,000, $100,000, and repaying the debts and get more funding. So it was that kind of a journey until where we are today.
So I'm curious, how much are you looking for today? For what?
We are opening our Series B round, and we'll be raising around $40 million, both in equity and debt, to help us grow the impact to the farmers in Tanzania, but also in the regional expansion, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, so that we can implement the same model and impact the lives of farmers in the entire agriculture value chain through our model.
Beautiful. It's a great journey, and a really exemplary example for us, for all of us. So maybe if I can turn now to Mr. Abdul. You've had a very rich career and gone through a long journey in the finance space. Can you just talk a little bit through some of that career and journey, and also how CRDB is helping your clients in understanding managing the climate risks as you go forward into financing, but also especially how you're helping young startups?
Thank you very much. The topic we're discussing, and I'm speaking from the commercial sector on the commercial banks, given my experience of the last 26 years, and linking with the topic of today about moving from investment to impact. I think there is a things which you need to be mindful. One, it requires total mindset shift, and it need to be a collaborative way. Why do I say so? I think from the banking perspective, we have been financing different projects, different sectors, but you are more profit-oriented sectors. And my colleague mentioned about startup. And basically, the environment by then doesn't allow commercial bank to invest much on startup. So you need to have innovation way. And these innovations, some are not regulated, and that created problems. For CRDB specifically, for example, we have been calling ourselves as the institution which create impact and respect climate change. But we do understand the risk posed within the climate change. And sometimes back, we're heated, basically. And it reached a stage in 2014 where the bank decided to create what you call environmental and social management system, where we directed all our channels in terms of originations, financing customers, ensure that there is a proper checklist. But we realize that the knowledge is a bigger problem as well. So over the period, we have been learning how to support the different sectors sustainably, but while being cautiously. And I'm happy that I mentioned earlier, the GCF accreditations gave us immense knowledge of what do we mean about risk related with climate change and how do we embark on. But I think what we have observed, first of all, is about the knowledge when we speak about climate change, financing in terms of resources, capacity building. So as a bank, we created internal capability to understand what do we mean by risk related with climate change? What do we mean by social? And which sector are impacted? Tanzania, being, of course, we are not far from other countries, most of the business are informal, less formal. And if they're informal, less formal, and the bank, you're moving with the same business, you have to be innovative really, because even regulation from central bank doesn't support you that way. So what we did from the bank perspective is that we looked on the areas, for example, renewable energy. The agriculture is the biggest area, which we believe for Tanzania it creates about 70% of employment. But most of the business, which is SME and micro, are purely agriculture. So for the bank of our size, for the bank of which we are scattered everywhere, that's the area we need to work on. And we have now designed a model where, for example, we call it special groups. Special groups in our case is women and youth. For women and youth is that most of the women are doing business, but very informal, less privileged, with a lot of restrictives in terms of conditionalities. So the bank made deliberate decisions out of our CSCI, which is about 1%. Instead of giving out those either schools, we create what we call seed capital. And this is pure seed capital, which is given to the groups of either youth or women's for their own business. And we have seen within the same capacity, we are also doing capacity building. And I'm happy that we have now tools within the banks, policy tools which we are using to train those groups. And this has created quite significant impacts. So for us as CRDB, we take this as an opportunity, even though it's impactful, but it's creating new business venue for us.
Thank you very much. That's really, really fascinating. And to see such a change in how the mind shift has gone through policy into practice really is, I think, exemplary. I wonder what that really means in terms of banking business. What sort of new asset classes or product lines have you then been bringing to these new market spaces? And what's that meant then for your banking book in terms of your own business performance?
Of course, one of the area which we are really doing well, I think, is on the smart agriculture. And we started financing agriculture through the AMCOs, and it ended up not doing well. So we moved to the individuals within the group of farmers, and we provide tools. One, for example, tractors and other tools, technology. We have financed those asset financing. But went to the level of also creating innovative way in terms of warehouse receipt, When I say warehouse receipt, I think you must be aware that farmers, when they're submitting their goods for sales at the auctions, they don't get paid in time. So the same receipt is discounted, and for them to rotate the same. That's another innovations. We are also doing the renewable energy financing, which is also another new line of business. But these are also integrated within our framework to manage risk and spend it. But when we are doing this, I think what we missed before, and this is the nature of most of the commercial banks, we tend to perceive customers, they are in need for funding. But some are not in need of funding. Some actually need to be educated to understand their business model, linking them with the market area, and linking with them other stakeholders in terms of, for example, input supplies, fertilizer supplies. That there's value chains which we created through this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I may just ask one last question to you. As a regulated commercial bank, is there any messages that you would like to share with regulators in giving the space for you to go through the changes that you've gone through or would like to go through?
I think one thing which is very interesting, regulations, especially for commercial bank, we are highly regulated. And these are international standards, both local and international. And some of these regulations does not fit the purpose of the environment. For example, there is no standardized way of reporting when you are dealing with kind of environmental friendly projects. They are treated equally like another projects. And that creates a challenge. For example, I mentioned about startup. These startup, they are non-secured facilities. So when you talk about capital charge, they always being treated equally. But these are the risks. So for me, I would encourage regulator, first of all, to think about how do you incentivize institutions which are embarking on the environmental friendly projects, either on capital reductions in terms of competitions, requirements, but secondly is about capacity building and education. For example, CRDB, we are very lucky to be more a pioneer when you speak about climate change element of SDG principles. And we are working very closely with central banks and the other banks. But we see the gap in terms of the knowledge. So central bank have the capability to create kind of those tools to ensure the sector basic educations are provided through collaborative with others. I think the other area which I think is more important is about reporting, standardizations of reporting framework. That will enable most of the sector to prosper well.
Thank you very much. Again, very insightful. So we've heard just from the panel that globalization has come to an end. We can see that there's some themes emerging here of cross-cutting issues, food security systems, energy security systems, logistics systems, all needing to come together, and financial systems all needing to be brought together. I think that then means that there's a real need for relationships and communities with a shared understanding. I just want to put one last question to the panel before I open up to the audience. And if I could maybe ask Diana, from UNEP perspective and what you're doing in V20, could you just talk a little bit about how UNEP V20 is looking to work in this space and really build communities and bring solutions in that space? Thank you.
So, so within the UNEP FI, under the principles of sustainable insurance, where the V20 Sustainable Insurance Facility sits, what we do is just develop climate smart insurance solutions across the various markets which the V20 program falls under. And allow me just to give a brief about the V20 forum. The V20 forum entails vulnerable countries, and the name V20 is because the founding countries were 20 of them. But currently, the membership of the V20 has grown. We have about 58 countries on it. And the idea is just to create solutions for these countries. And this cuts across Latin America and the Caribbean, Asia and Pacific, Africa and the Middle East. And we, within the V20 Sustainable Insurance Facility, is develop these climate smart insurance solutions. Two, we look for who are the partners who we are bringing on board on some of these solutions to ensure the delivery of the solutions. And this is based on the strengths and capacities of each of the players that we identify in the different markets. And then we match that to funding to bring the projects to life. So technically what we are bring on board is being a catalyst for these projects to ensure that they come to life and they get the necessary funding and support, and to ensure that these projects as well are looked at to ensure it meets both angles in terms of mitigation and adaptation as well, and targeting specifically the micro and SME space. And why the micro and SME space is because most of the countries which fall under the Vulnerable 20 forum, most of them contribute 50 to 80% to the GDPs of those countries. So it is imperative that we find solutions for them to build more resilience for them, but also use the same model to ensure that we are pushing for low carbon emissions through the various sectors. So we also identify which sectors need support, then craft solutions for those sectors.
Thank you very much, Diana. So maybe now if we can turn to the audience, if there's any questions from the floor, please can I ask you to raise your hand, introduce yourself, your organisation, and your question, and if it's to somebody specific, please do. We have around 10 minutes or so for questions. Don't be shy, or else the panel will ask questions to you. We have one here, and we have one at the back of the room. We need a mic round, please.
Yes. Hello. Good morning or afternoon. Jet lag. I'm Alex Cota, El Dorado Teresa from Mexico, the other continent. So I was very interested in the beginning of the panel, what you were talking about, how to solve the problem with the 30% of the actual investments of solar solution for agriculture. In the city where we are, water is very limited. It's a big problem. In your solution, you have these irrigation models using solar power. It can be applied to any part of the world. For instance, we're talking about Africa and Asia, but is there some impact for Latin America, Mexico? That would be my question.
Thank you for the question. The water challenge is really interesting. Africa is the only continent in the world that the water experts say has an economic water scarcity versus a physical water scarcity. Every other continent in the world has a physical water scarcity, very little groundwater. Africa has what's called an economic water scarcity because there's enough groundwater to increase irrigation by 20 times across the continent without draining resources that would then compete with other industry. So we've looked at specific countries in Latin America and Central Asia, but from a broad perspective, Africa is the only continent that has the sufficient groundwater to do that. The International Water Management Institute, IMWI, did a report on Africa and solar irrigation in 2021, and they looked at how many irrigation systems you could deploy across the continent without it competing or creating challenges for other industries. In Africa, or at least in Kenya, it's 700,000 irrigation systems. Across Africa, it was somewhere between 50 and 100 million irrigation systems can be deployed. Now, Latin America does have different challenges that I can't speak to directly because we haven't done studies in all the countries there. The reason we focus on Africa is just because if we're looking at sort of food growth, we think that this could be a breadbasket. But we have looked at Mexico, we've looked at some places in Central America. Happy to share with you sort of offline the pieces we found, but no, this isn't necessarily something that should be deployed in all parts of the world. It's not a, water depletion is a big issue, and whatever country we deploy this in, we have to be very careful to make sure that we're monitoring water levels, and we do so in a safe way.
Thank you, Samir. I think it's worth also pulling out from your presentation that your business solution is not simply solar power to drive water irrigation. It is also really understanding about what the market needs are, communicating back to farmers, educating farmers on what is appropriate crops, how to prevent over-irrigation and damaging the soils. It's quite a comprehensive business solution, and that's really what really makes it into a resilient and powerful outcome. Thank you. We had a question, I think, at the back of the room.
Yeah.
Can you just give your name, your organization, before you ask your question? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Linas. I'm still a student here in Kenya, and also I volunteer with a number of organizations, including UNESCO, San Antonio International, and also I have an organization called Green World Youth. Green World Youth is a coalition of young change makers that advocate for sustainable development goals, but mostly on climate action. My first question is, we are local organizations, and I'm a student. We don't have certification for us to get funding. Though we create impact at grassroots level. Right now, I have more than 1 million tree seedlings ready for planting. We don't have funding. If you approach the government, they will request you to share your legal document for you to get funding. I want to ask, how best can you help grassroots organization to leverage their project to make their dreams come reality? Another thing is I want to congratulate and appreciate the positive insight from Diana. And also from Abdul, sorry for pronouncing your name here. If I know that if you bring the concept and the business model also here in Kenya, we'll appreciate. And to all stakeholders creating impact towards the world, all over the world, keep up the good work, influence other people to do it, and also I'm ready to offer my value to you. So feel free to get contact with me, and I'll amplify what you do also.
It's a great question. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to ask Elia to give a response to it.
Thank you, Yuan. I wish I had money. I would have looked into that. I think my suggestion as an entrepreneur is, and the stage where you are, is to organize yourself as formal as early as possible. I think some of the mistakes we did in the past was to operate informally. So we have this beautiful idea, but in terms of organization, not very well formal. So given that you have capability to organize yourself in a formal way and position yourself to receive funding, I think we'll be able to do that. But I'll pass this to Tamara and Abdul Majid. I think they can answer the funding point better than me.
Yeah, thank you very much for compliment, but also I like the energy and the idea, because I think this is what we have been missing, even in Tanzania. For example, in Tanzania, currently the government has created a program called Build a Better Tomorrow for all graduates who are ready to be farmer. However, for CRDB case, and this can also apply here, but also obviously I will be able to invite you during a holiday to visit Tanzania to study what you are doing. Within the bank, we understand the challenge you're mentioning. In CRDB, we decided to come up with a separate dedicated foundations called the CRDB Foundations. And this is focusing on youth and informal groups, which are special groups like women's. What we are currently doing, we are forming a group of youth. We are training them because they have brilliant idea. They are good, they are ready. During the training, we are talking about business insights and what is required. And we do provide funding for registering your companies as a group, because we believe on the peer group initiatives instead of individual. And this has enabled us, as we speak today, we have about currently, before year end, in a span of 6 months, created a total of about 40,000 individuals within groups. And we have started financing them on what you call seed capital. Of course, there is an interest-free facility purely from our CSI investment of 1%, but you have to repay it back as provided to you, so that your other groups tend to get the same, because you don't have enough fund to cover the demand. So this kind of innovative idea obviously address some of the challenges I've just highlighted. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, as a fund, we invest in businesses, but offline, we're more than happy to speak and share with you and connect you to our network among the NGOs and great organizations that are doing an amazing work when it comes to grassroots efforts like yourselves. So please, let's connect offline after the session, and we'll be more than happy to help. Thank you.
We have one question over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Gareth Phillips. I'm the Manager of Climate and Environmental Finance at the African Development Bank. So I wanted to ask the panel, perhaps Samir in particular, you mentioned carbon on your pitch. Have voluntary carbon markets or other sources of carbon finance played any role in your business models? And if not, why not? And whether any of you have had any success or challenges in mobilizing resources from adaptation benefits or nature-based credits or other sorts of co-benefits that you've been able to monetize. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gareth. And the African Development Bank is one of our lenders through another facility, so thank you for the support. We use the sale of carbon credits in the voluntary market and very soon the compliance markets to self-subsidize the cost of our systems for our farmers to increase addressable markets. And we've been having some early success. We just started selling carbon credits in the voluntary market and have had success doing so. I think that the challenge in the voluntary market is that all of these corporates made their net zero commitments and no one wants to end up around John Oliver or in The Guardian. So nobody wants to end up looking like they're greenwashing, and they don't know what quality looks like. So there's this sort of fight to figure out, okay, I promise that I'm going to be net zero. In order for me to meet my net zero commitments, I need to buy carbon credits. I don't know which ones to buy because I don't want to look bad. And we're seeing a really big difference in what people describe as quality. So we try to be very transparent. We submit all of our remote monitoring data. We take people on field visits. We touch 13 SDGs, so there's a lot of co-benefits. But the challenge we're having is communicating. So the communication and narrative piece is quite difficult, and that's where we lean on our partners to help us do so. In terms of other additionality benefits, we haven't yet been able to monetize them. We're running a study with Duke University that's looking at quantifying all of our SDG benefits, so hopefully we can then monetize them. But we'd love to be able to monetize water benefits, reduction in time spent on drudgery, nutrition benefits, et cetera, et cetera. I know the African Development Bank is working on stuff like this, and I think it's really important because there's a lot of corporates who are trying to offset their upstream usage. So, for example, companies like Starbucks are trying to offset, monetize that in order to help reduce the price. So we're exploring it, but we haven't gone really hard in that just yet.
Thank you very much. So we're running out of time, so I'm just going to give a quick summary. We see quite clearly that climate impacts are challenging business as usual. As Samir said, bad things happen. But we also see that there's opportunity for bringing innovative business models that are based around putting the UN SDGs at the center of identifying the needs, the real needs of society, and opening up resilient and multi-stream revenues, which give real resilience to the borrower or the people at the most vulnerable, especially giving ease of access. Globalization is over, but that resilience of local demand management really is where there is resilient new business opportunity. Traditional financing is hungry for new areas to invest higher returns, but it's nervous and cautious of the corresponding risks in these business models. By building relationships and communities, we're able to bring a new narrative forward and unravel the risk profile and get confidence that actually these businesses can really make a meaningful impact. We need to challenge how some of the regulation is happening, and in particular, we need to also look at reporting to regulators, reporting up through the value chain to investors, reporting on carbon and other social impacts, so that there's comfort and confidence from all in the value chain that actually both the risks are being managed, but also the returns are coming through. I'd like to ask you all to thank our panel, who I think have been incredible in sharing real insights. And for me, it's been really enjoyable sitting here. I also would like to thank the audience for your patience and your questions. And also especially like to thank my colleague Mayuresh, who has organized this fantastic panel to make this event really happen. So big thank you to you all. Big round of applause, please.